In this video, I'm going to show you why it is a good idea to always try and get the most recent set of notes when you're preparing for your business studies exams, tests, or any other type of formal assessment. With my grade 12 learners this year, I'm using notes from the National Department of Basic Education 2024. I'm happy with these notes. They are thorough, and they are from the National Department, which I find to be the most reliable source. I have seen two sets of notes from 2025, but there are certain areas where they differ, and because of that, and because I'm not sure whether the changes in the other set of notes are in effect or not, because I haven't verified that, I'm sticking with the 2024 DBE notes for now. And I'm really hoping for the DBE to publish 2025 notes. That would be the best case scenario for me. But to illustrate the importance of using recent notes in business studies, I'm going to compare three sets of notes. It's the Gauteng 2019, Limpopo 2023, and the DBE 2024. The differences are not that many, so they're not a matter of passing or failing, but the version you use does put a ceiling on the potential marks that you can get. So we're going to start by looking at the provisions of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act in legislation. And all of these points that I'm comparing are going to be coming from grade 12 term 1 content, which also shows you, how these notes differ. I'm only looking at term 1 content for grade 12. So let's start with the BCEA, just that section around the family responsibility leave. So in 2019, according to the Gauteng notes, we only had family responsibility leave, which is 3 to 5 days paid leave per year on request in the event of the death of the employee's spouse, life partner, children, and so forth. An employer may require reasonable proof before granting this leave. What we also have is a mention of male employees who are entitled to a maximum of 3 or 5 days paternity leave when a child is born. So as we see here, there is no separate paternity leave. If a man is expecting a child, he can claim 3 days from the family responsibility leave, with the reason being paternity or paternity leave. Okay, so in other words, if he uses up those 3 days for paternity leave, he would have used up his family responsibility leave days for the year. So that was Gauteng 2019. If we look at Limpopo 2023, we see the heading family responsibility / paternity leave, which suggests now that when you get questions like this, or when, let's say, you have a multiple choice and you see statements like this, you can either say family responsibility or you could say paternity. But what we also see is that mention of a male parent taking leave for 3 days is no longer there. What we also have is the inclusion of parental leave, which was not there in 2019. And parental leave, an employee who is a parent is entitled to 10 consecutive days parental leave after the birth of his or her child, irrespective of gender. So there's also the gender difference now. In paternity leave, it was a male employee, but in parental leave now, it's irrespective of gender. There's the 3 to 5 days in family responsibility, and there are the 10 days in parental leave. Family responsibility is paid, and parental leave is unpaid. So when I first saw these, I was confused, and I didn't know when each one applied. I thought, does the expectant parent choose which one to claim from? Do you take 3 days paid or 10 days unpaid? I honestly was not sure what's going on, so I went ahead and did my own research because as a teacher, I always want to be clear about what I'm teaching. And so I found this article from Labor Guide, which really gave me clarity. So it says, as from the 1st of January 2020, the 3 days family responsibility leave employees were entitled to upon the birth of a child was replaced with parental leave as per the Labor Laws Amendment Act of 2018. So what do we see now? That the paternal rights that were included in family responsibility have been replaced with parental leave. So now I know that, okay, parental leave replaced paternity leave. The remainder of the family responsibility leave remains intact, entitling employees to 3 days family responsibility leave when a child is sick or on the death of or upon the death of a family member as listed in the Act. So in other words, the only thing that was removed from the family responsibility leave was the paternity leave, but the rest of the family responsibility leave remains as it is. In terms of the Labor Laws Amendment Act, an employee is entitled to 10 days parental leave upon the birth of the employee's child. Parental leave may also be applicable in circumstances where an employee legally adopts a child or when a child is placed by the court in the care of a prospective adoptive parent. Based on the aforementioned, it is evident that both male and female employees may qualify for parental leave, depending on the circumstances. However, if the employee gave birth to the child, she would not qualify for parental leave. Such employee is entitled to 4 months unpaid maternity leave. In other words, the maternity leave remains as it was as well. As the pregnant woman giving birth to a child, you claim maternity leave. And the pregnant woman would count as the primary caregiver. Okay. In terms of adoption as well, the primary caregiver would claim 10 weeks of adoption if a child is of a certain age. So this parental leave is for the secondary parent. The secondary parent, whether male or female, can take parental leave. And if you want to confirm this, the amendments can be found on this correction notice, which was published on the 17th of February 2020. However, the actual parental leave came into effect on the 1st of January 2020. So considering that parental leave came into effect in 2020, it makes sense then that anything after that would have to change, like in terms of our content. And so when I saw this, when I understood it from the research, I was pleased to know that I was teaching content that was adapting with changing legislation, with current affairs. It made more sense. And so I thought maybe they're just keeping the word paternity leave there as a transition just to keep it so that we remember that it was there. To be honest, I didn't understand why they kept the paternity leave there, but maybe I'm thinking it was just a transitionary thing. But in my mind then, I had family responsibility and parental leave as the leaves here. DBE 2024, we have family responsibility leave on its own. There's no longer that / paternity, which is perfect because that is how it stands according to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And then the paternity leave was moved to be next to parental leave. In other words, now you could treat parental and paternity as interchangeable. I advised my learners to just learn it as parental just because that is how it is in the legislation, and I don't think it's wise for me to teach my learners something that is only relevant to the subject, but in reality, it doesn't stand that way. But what I told them was, if you come across it in something like a multiple choice and you see the word paternity and it is the only correct possible answer, then use it. But if you're going to write it from your own words, then write parental. Now we're moving on to the BBBEE. In 2019, we have the old pillars and the revised pillars, and that's how it used to be. You'd learn the old pillars and the new pillars, although I would tell my learners focus more on the new pillars. The implications were explained for both pillars, so it was quite a long list of implications and their explanations, quite a lot of information. In 2023, as you see here, we only have 5, which are the current pillars: management control, skills development, ownership, ESD, social development. And again, this is perfect. We only have the relevant information, and only the implications of these pillars are explained in the 2023 notes, which kind of halves the amount of work that was there, or the amount of content, just in terms of BEE pillars, that was there in the 2019 notes. Now, what is also added is the difference between BEE and BBBEE in general. And as you see, it's quite a brief difference. So it's not something you'd expect in an essay, but I think if I look at it, at the most, it could be out of 4 marks. In 2024, it is a more thorough differentiation. Now you have enough information to ask this kind of question in an essay or in section B, for 6 marks or for 8 marks. Okay, maybe not 6 marks, for 8 marks or for 12 marks. So I realized this when I gave my learners an activity. A colleague of mine gave me the activity who I share the subject with, and my learners were answering the activity. And then they said, "Miss, we don't have this in our notes." And I was like, let me see. And I saw the question and realized I was using the Limpopo 2024 notes at that time, and I knew that the table was too small for the mark allocation that was given the question. I think the question was out of 8 marks, and the table was not enough to give something out of 8 marks. So I took a look at the memo and I saw this table, and I was like, wait, this is the first time I'm seeing this table. Where is it coming from? And I remembered that I had the notes from the Department of Basic Education. So I thought, let me look at them and see if they don't have. So when I looked and they had, then I concluded that these are the notes that I'm going for. Because if this table exists in the notes, it can be asked in an essay, and I want my learners to be prepared to answer this question. Another thing that's great about these 2024 DBE notes, which I hope that they just continue that way with them, is they have these wonderful explanations. I mean, for one, they have these introductions at the beginning of each topic, which learners can use for their introductions to essays or conclusions, I feel, because it's not part of the actual content. It's just a general summary or introduction to the topic. And also, they explain what is the meaning of implications of BEE pillars. So as you see here, it says, note, the word implication in this context means what businesses should do in order to comply with this act, and what are the things that are preventing them from implementing this act. The last sentence of each pillar speaks to things that prevent businesses from implementing their pillar. So personally, I would still confuse the implications of BEE pillars with ways of complying with the BBBEE, because the implications of the pillars do seem like actions of compliance. I mean, if you look at the explanation there at number 1, the word implication means ways that businesses should comply, or what businesses should do to comply. So I am hoping that they could adjust this a little bit so there could be clarity between implications and compliance, just where BEE is concerned. It is quite confusing. And so we move on to creative thinking and problem solving. The problem solving techniques. In 2019, these were the techniques. In 2023, these were the techniques. In 2024, these were the techniques. So there's a whole 4 techniques that were removed: mind mapping, Scamper, forced combination, and empty chair. I loved teaching Scamper, but it was complicated. It was quite difficult for the learners to process. And I can't imagine what it must have been like to have to explain it in an exam. So as much as I loved teaching it, I'm happy for it to not be there. Mind mapping was quite straightforward. Forced combination was fun. Empty chair was really easy. And the funny thing is about empty chair is in the explanation of how to apply empty chair from the 2019 notes is just speak to an empty chair and imagine another person sitting there. The 4 that were left, Delphi, force field, brainstorming, nominal group, they allow you to really go in depth with them as a teacher. And, now we look at their impact, the advantages and disadvantages and how to apply them. So you get to go more thoroughly into one technique. And I think that is more effective than to just go through a whole lot of techniques, just explaining them. And really the 2019 was a lot. I think it's a lot to process than to just focus on the 4 and explain them in depth or understand them in depth. So moving on to our final one. It's the role of the interviewee during the interview, which is found in HR. At the beginning of 2024, during our subject workshop / meeting with our subject advisor, he specifically brought out this point when learners are asked to outline the role of an interviewee during an interview. Before, it was acceptable for them to say, ask clarity-seeking questions. But what he said was that it came across as vague when they were marking it. He was giving us feedback from the marking centers. I think it's called a moderator's report. So he was giving us that feedback, and he said such points can come across as vague, and he was encouraging us to give more thorough, or to tell our learners to give more thorough answers. And as you see, it was elaborated on moving onwards. In 2024, it then became ask clarity-seeking questions about the position offered. And it's also highlighted or written in bold in the 2024 notes, just to show that this is the section that changed. Everything else remains the same. So the 2024 notes from the DBE are also helpful because they do have these bolded sections that draw your attention. And if we just compare past papers, we look at the top paper, the one in red, is November 2024, and the green one at the bottom is November 2023. You see the memo in 2020 gave 2 marks for saying ask clarity-seeking questions. Just that gave you 2 marks. It was enough. But in the 2023 memo, you're expected to say ask clarity-seeking questions about the job or the position offered. So you're expected to elaborate a little. Now, if you've been learning from the previous versions and you only know ask clarity-seeking questions, that means moving forward, you would be depriving yourself of that 1 mark. And 1 mark may not be a lot, but for that learner who wants the most amount of marks for their personal potential, that 1 mark means a lot. And if I, as a teacher, expose them to limited notes, then I'm limiting them, because there are learners who are able to learn all of these notes and to memorize them. And if they had exposure to the full answer, they would have been able to give it. So if I give them the smaller answer, then to an extent, I'm the one who has deprived them of reaching their full potential. So, as you can see from the examples that I compared, it is in your best interest to use the most recent notes available to ensure that you achieve the maximum marks possible. And if you want the 2024 DBE notes, you will find them on my website, B.Studies.co.za. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please type them in the comments section. See you in the next video. Take care.